Tonight, the John Bolton indictment, claims of a diary-style family chat playing fast and loose with America's secrets. Did the Trump critic break the law, or is he just the latest stop on the revenge tour? We're going to go inside the indictment together tonight on Laura Coates Live. 3 indictments of President Trump's enemies in 21 days. First, you had James Comey, then Letitia James, and now John Bolton. You're no doubt going to hear that these 3 names are lumped together, but let's be clear, one of these is not like the others. How we got to John Bolton's indictment, frankly, it's fundamentally different. Let's look at what we know, okay? Prosecutors are charging him with 18 counts of mishandling sensitive national defense information. He's facing up to 10 years in prison on each charge. They allege that he shared more than 1,000 pages about his activities as National Security Advisor in the Trump administration. They say that it contained information up to the top secret level. They accuse him of a number of things. And they are accusations, of course, in an indictment. They got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. But they accuse him of sending it over his personal email and a messaging app to 2 people who did not even have a security clearance. Now, sources tell CNN that those people without that clearance were his wife and his daughter. The prosecutors are saying that Bolton created a group chat with them the day before he began working as National Security Advisor. And when his family asked why you make the group chat, he told them, quote, for diary in the future. The prosecutors say that Bolton sent them not one, but multiple documents throughout that chat or through his personal email. And it apparently was extremely high-level stuff, including intel about a future attack by an adversarial group in another country. The indictment says the day after he stopped working as National Security Advisor, his literary agent emailed a publisher about Bolton wanting to publish a book. Now you add another layer to this. Prosecutors say that Bolton's email was at some point hacked by someone associated with Iran. And even though the FBI knew about an hack, they allege he did not tell the FBI that he sent classified information to his family, possibly through that email. So that's the Bolton indictment as it stands right now. 26 pages we're going to unpack further with experts. But here's why it's different from James Comey and Letitia James. Their indictments, thin. I mean, literally. Comey's indictment is, what, 2 pages? James's, I think, is 5 pages. Bolton's is 26. And I know that it's quality over quantity. I remember. But it also is different in this way. Not only are the claims different, but the Bolton one went through the normal procedure, so to speak. It was signed off by a career prosecutor. There wasn't an interim U.S. attorney that was handpicked by Trump. There was no DOJ official who was fired for refusing to play along. No attorneys were brought from the outside of the jurisdiction of that office, from places like North Carolina or anywhere else. No, it was forced out, at least as far as we know right now. Plus, there was a judge who had been involved in the Bolton case pretty early on. What do I mean? Well, the FBI searched Bolton's home. They seized multiple documents back in August, and that means a judge had to sign off on it. A warrant, in other words. No similar warrant in the cases we know of for Comey or James in that same fashion. But despite the differences, there is a piece of connective tissue. There's a key you really would have to put your head in the sand to ignore. And that is, Trump has made it abundantly clear he doesn't like Bolton. He also doesn't like Comey or James. Case in point, his reaction to the indictment today.
I think he's, a bad person. I think he's a bad guy. Yeah, he's a bad guy. It's too bad, but
have you reviewed the case against him?
That's the way it goes, right? That's the way it goes. Will I what?
Have you reviewed the case against him?
No, I haven't. But I just think he's a bad person.
Also remember that email, that post that he had sent to Pam Bondi didn't include Bolton on that one, in spite of how he feels about him. But the bad blood, that goes back through the years. I mean, the list of insults. He's called him dumb as a rock, a dumb warmonger, one of the dumbest people in Washington. And back in 2020, he was saying this.
He released massive amounts of classified and confidential but classified information. That's illegal, and you go to jail for that. He's a criminal, and I believe, frankly, he should go to jail for that.
That was 2020. So yes, Trump has an axe to grind. But it also means two things can be true. This case may be far more serious than the ones against Comey and James. And it may have been pursued because Trump is in office. Presumption of innocence is probably the third category to think about here. But as for what John Bolton has to say about all this, well, for him, this is only political. He says, my book was reviewed and approved by the appropriate, experienced career clearance officials. When my email was hacked in 2021, the FBI was made fully aware. In 4 years of the prior administration, after these reviews, no charges were ever filed. Then came Trump, too, who embodies what Joseph Stalin's head of secret police once said, you show me the man, and I'll show you the crime. We've got some competing experts who see this case very differently. Talking about James Trusty, the president's former lawyer in the classified documents case. He's going to join me in a moment. Also, Mark Zaid is here. Let's go to him first because he's one of the premier national security attorneys in the country. He has testified before Congress on matters regarding classified information, representing dozens of high-profile clients in cases involving the Espionage Act as well. And as you know, we've covered this here. The administration has revoked Mark's security clearance earlier this year. Mark, I'm glad you're here. I'm not even going to ask you if you're surprised that this may have been the outcome in terms of a pursuit of an investigation of Bolton, but he is innocent until proven guilty. You have been a former longtime, a former lawyer. Of course, you are a lawyer. You have known these former people in the administration for a long time, people who have been accused of a whole host of things. You're representing a number of them. He is a former longtime government official. Should he have known better, given especially how frequently we have in the court of public opinion and law confronted people who have retained or disseminated top secret or classified information?
He does know better. That's why they cite his own quotes in the indictment. But I'll tell you this. I mean, I've represented from low-level officials in the government to individuals at his rank and cabinet officers. When I've handled these pre-publication review cases, everyone always comes to me and says, I made sure there's nothing classified in the book. And I always say the same thing back to them. It's not your call any longer because you're not in the government. It's the government's understanding of it. And the executive order on classification is incredibly broad. And we may not see what the specific facts are, the documents, the information because of the classification level, and I'll reserve judgment until we know more.
Of course.
But it is very easy for the government to say, that's classified, I'm going to prosecute you for it. Not surprised at all. This is just one of many that will come this way.
They also talk about, though, that the book substances, that's not really the crux of what they're dealing with predominantly in this indictment, which I think will make a difference in how they explore this particular case. But the indictment does allege, and again, they're all allegations, we know that, but the government in indictments normally is required, as you can imagine, to only put forth the things that they believe they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And one of the things they think they can do is that they say that he created a group chat with his wife and daughter before beginning his role as a national security advisor for Trump. And what for? His words, for diary in the future. How does that play with intent?
So I will say this happens all the time. I'm not going to judge at this time whether or not he put classified information in it. I don't know.
But
I should
what
emphasize
happens all the
we've talked
time?
about this.
What do you mean? What happens all the time? The idea of keeping notes about your career?
What happens all the time is everyone who writes a book brings the information home, emails it to themselves, takes notes, includes others. This is commonplace. I'm not saying it's right. In fact, I argue all the time that this is not how the process should be, because the information has to be protected, not just classified. National defense information in the Espionage Act can be unclassified. It usually is classified if they're going to prosecute you for it. But this policy of how these books get written by senior officials, both Democrat and Republican, including in Trump's own administration, and I dare say it will happen from this administration when these officials leave Trump too. This is how they write their books, and it is overlooked by the government, every administration, all the time, until they get caught, like General Petraeus, if folks remember that, where he gave his mistress, who was his co-writer or his author, classified information. She at least had a security clearance. He had 2 years suspension and a $100,000 fine. Very similar case, at least on paper, for what we're seeing now. But everyone who wants to write a book in the federal government should be very concerned by this indictment, because the practice is being put on trial. I don't know what will happen to Bolton at the end.
Sure.
Most of these cases never go to trial because they usually plead out, because the government has such an, frankly, easy burden at times to meet.
Would he have any incentive to do that, given, of course, he believes this is political in nature, number one, and number two, he undoubtedly is making a case for a selective prosecution, which frankly goes to what you're talking about. If everybody's doing it, and I know it's being tongue-in-cheek in my paraphrasing of you, but if everyone's doing it, but you chose me, and the reason you chose me, he will say, is for vindictive reasons, it's selective, it's not just a regular old discretion a prosecutor can use. How do you think the prevalence of this would play into his ability to make that claim?
You know, as you know, those are very difficult claims to make. They almost always fail. But if any administration or prosecutions would be susceptible to it, it is the ones we are seeing now of those perceived enemies of Donald Trump. And even though Bolton wasn't, as you mentioned in the text message or the signal chat message, wherever it was, to Pam Bondi, he's still been on the president's mind for years. And there is definitely an argument to be made, as was in Bolton's statement. This has been known for years. Why hasn't anyone gone after him in all that time? Why did the Trump administration drop pursuing him back in 2020 when they could have? Why now? So those are all motions that will be brought for sure. And I have no doubt that there's a lot of evidence to show that there is selectivity to this. Will that make a difference at the end? I don't know. We'll see, obviously. But it is a troubling prosecution. And like I said, I think it's one of many under the Espionage Act, including journalists, I believe, who will be targeted, because these claims are easy to make or allege by the federal government because of the breadth and broadness of the statute. Again, national defense information does not need to be classified, and the indictment insinuates that some of it wasn't. And you mentioned before, I think it needs to be really highlighted, the book that he published in 2021 or 2020, whenever the end of the year was when it came out, is not part of the indictment. It is this diary transfer of information with his wife and daughter, and it's not also the documents that were said to have been found in his house that were marked as classified. You don't see that in the indictment either, and I think that says something.
There's a lot to compare, and of course the viewing audience and the people who have been following cases even recently, they're going to immediately start to compare the Trump indictment. They're going to think about the investigation into Pence and to Biden as well. And I don't believe that the idea of, well, why me, why now, is going to be sufficient to overcome the hurdle that he will have in a case like this. But we don't know what will happen. These are allegations. If you were his attorney, given all that you have seen in the course of your career when cases like this are being evaluated, do you think that a viable plea opportunity is in his future, or is this going to trial?
Well, I guess it depends on what that plea offer might be. Like I said, I think it's very comparable to the Petraeus case, and he only got 2 years probation. If the motions on selectivity and vindictiveness fail, or some other challenge perhaps to the classification status, which is very difficult to do and almost always fails under the Espionage Act. I'm not talking about Bolton's case just historically, but they can make that argument. The district court in Maryland, where this is, doesn't handle a lot of Espionage Act cases. The Fourth Circuit, which is above it, has handled more, including ones I've been part of.
Yep.
So they have greater experience. But, if he got something, I have no idea what they would do. But if he got something that didn't include jail time, maybe. But, I'm sure he's going to fight it long and hard. Look, I should say his lawyer is my lawyer, too, Abby Lowell. And I work with Abby all the time. I have nothing to do with Bolton's case.
Sure.
But there's a lot of arguments that will be made by both sides, and wait till they get into discovery to see how this case progressed along over the years and why did it take so many years.
Mark Zaid, thank you. I want to turn now to Jim Trusty, who I will remind you did represent the president for a time in his classified documents case, as comparisons will undoubtedly be drawn in this. Jim, I want to know your opinion and assessment here. You've read this indictment cover to cover. How strong is the indictment?
Yeah. Well, look, it's early. We don't have discovery. I'm not totally at odds with what Mark had to say about the motions practice and the probabilities being pretty low in terms of the defense winning those things. But you never know until you get into discovery. I would tell you, though, that, this is familiar territory in that I know Kelly Hayes, the U.S. Attorney for Maryland. I worked in Greenbelt for 10 years where the indictment came down. This is not a lightly undertaken venture. This is a speaking indictment that is devastating on its face. Again, not trial yet, but devastating on its face when you talk about specific intent and his knowledge. This is a guy above all people. This is one of the reasons selective prosecution would be so hard. Who is similar to the national security advisor with a history like John Bolton and a history of publicly berating others for not knowing the rules when it comes to classified material? You can't write daily diary entries about national defense information and pretend that somehow that's sanitized. That's not a problem to possess that. And here's the rub. The reason that he was so willful in his behavior is when they went through that process with the book of trying to clear what stuff he's allowed to put in his kiss and tell book that he got $1 million for the signing rights on. Again, he doesn't love President Trump either, and he cashed in on that nicely, and that's the problem. But the bottom line is that book was something where Judge Lamberth got involved, and the government filed for a restraining order against Bolton, granted the restraining order, and literally said to John Bolton, "You're endangering the country's security and you're risking indictment." So that's the notice this guy gets a few years ago. The damage is this. He's taking very sensitive material, if you read this indictment. Things about, coups against foreign leaders and military action and threats to different countries. And he's putting it on Gmail and AOL, probably to his mother and his daughter, if we read the tea leaves correctly.
His wife, I believe.
Saying, we're going to type this up, we're going to have a diary. And it got hacked by Iran. Like, this is the nightmare for national security, that a guy at his level is creating a pipeline that Iran, of all places, could access. So he's got a lot to answer for. I don't expect him to get a soft plea offer on these facts.
I hear you, and the severity of the claims in this indictment. I do want to note, people are making comparisons to the high-level position, to the former president at that time, the now president again. The president is heard in an audio clip saying that he kept a classified Pentagon document about a potential attack on Iran, and that was after leaving the White House. When you look at these two different cases, and they are different, do you think what President Trump did will factor in at all to the allegations against Bolton? Given that there's no one who would be in a similar position, to your point, as someone like a national security advisor for the purpose of asserting a selective prosecution, which requires essentially somebody in the same position or similar wasn't chosen to be prosecuted.
Right. Well, President Trump was prosecuted. I think it was the onset of weaponization. He also had the benefit of the Presidential Records Act and the documents when they arrived in Mar-a-Lago. He was still president. So there was all sorts of differences factually. Frankly, and Mark kind of made this point, the trouble is these guys that want to do kiss and tell books and cash in. Petraeus, he ends up falling afoul because he's got an author who he's sharing stuff with. Joe Biden wants to write a self-serving book when he stores stuff over by his Corvette in Delaware. And now you have this case. And that's kind of the common thread. Frankly, Comey's got the same issue floating out there about creating diary entries at Trump's expense and then sharing them through leaks to the New York Times. So look, there's a lot of sloppy, bad, narcissistic behavior. You don't get indicted for that, but it flavors the indictment and makes this look like a pretty righteous case on its face when Bolton is exactly the guy that knows the rules and exactly the guy that broke it. And by the way, 2019, DOJ comes to him. You know, you talk about delays. They come to him in 2019 and they say, we have to remove the skiff from your Chevy Chase home. And you cannot have any other classified documents, whether they're part of the book or not. Now's the time to turn in your homework. And he doesn't do it. He's got hard copies. He's got electronic copies. When he gets hacked by Iran, he doesn't say, by the way, I had a whole bunch of diary entries about classified information. None of that happened.
So we'll see. The timeline's going to be important in this, as are the allegations. I will note, as you know, the case of classified documents did not go forward against now President Trump, but this case will be compared nonetheless. Jim Trusty, thank you.
Been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.